The rehabilitation wing at St. Aldrich's Specialist Hospital smelled like antiseptic and rain, the kind of London rain that hit the windows and sheets and made the fluorescent lights feel warmer than they were. Jihoon Kang walked the corridor the way he walked into board meetings, spine straight, jaw set, eyes forward. Nobody here knew that 6 minutes ago he'd been sitting outside his grandfather's room, unable to make himself go in, because Chairman Kang's stroke had stripped something from the old man's face that Jihoon didn't have a name for yet. Fear, maybe. On a man who had never once looked afraid in 32 years. He'd gone in anyway. Sat beside the bed. Said nothing worth remembering. Left when the nurse came to change the 4-line. Now he was walking back toward the lifts, phone buzzing uselessly in his pocket, sole office, another sole office, his assistant 3 times, when the automatic doors at the end of the corridor slid open and the wind came through sideways with the rain, and a folder slipped out of someone's hands. He didn't see her face first. He saw the papers scatter, insurance forms, a school enrollment sheet, a child's vaccination card, sliding and skidding across the tile like something had knocked the floor sideways. And he saw a small boy, maybe 5, standing very still in the middle of the wreckage of paper, watching it fall with the calm of a child who has learned that paper falling is not the same as the world falling. Then he looked up, and it was Sarah. 6 years dropped out of the room all at once. She hadn't changed the way he'd imagined she would, imagined her changed, actually, in the version of this he'd built in his head during the worst nights, the version where she was somewhere warm and easy with someone who wasn't him. She looked exactly like herself, only tired in a way that had nothing to do with tonight. She was already crouching, gathering papers with quick, practiced hands, not looking at him, and for one full second Jihoon thought his legs had simply stopped working, because he couldn't make them cross the 6 feet of tile between them. A single photograph had slid free of the pile and stopped against his shoe. He bent down. Picked it up. A boy in a school uniform, gap-toothed, grinning at whoever was holding the camera. Ordinary. He almost set it back on the pile without really looking. Then he looked. The boy in the photograph was wearing a necklace. A thin brass chain, a small compass pendant, tarnished at the edges the way brass tarnishes when it's worn every single day for years and never taken off. Jihoon had bought that compass at a stall in Borough Market 6 years ago, on an evening he still remembered in unbearable detail, the smell of roasting chestnuts, Sarah laughing at something he'd said, the way she'd let him fasten the clasp himself even though her hands were free. "So you always know your way back to me," he'd told her, and felt like an idiot the second it left his mouth, and she'd kissed him anyway. He looked up. The boy, the real one, standing in front of him now, not the photograph, was still watching the last of the papers settle. And when he turned, curious about the tall stranger who'd gone very quiet, the boy smiled. A dimple appeared, sharp and small, at the corner of his left cheek. Jihoon had that exact dimple. His grandfather had it. Every firstborn Kang son for 4 generations had it, a family joke, a family mark, the thing his mother used to press her thumb against when he was small and say, "There's my proof you're really mine." The math arrived before he wanted it to. 6 years. A 5-year-old boy. His compass. His mark. Sarah. His voice came out wrong, too quiet, too rough. She didn't look up. Ethan, she caught herself, corrected, the word coming out strange and clipped. Caleb. Hold my hand. The boy obeyed instantly, small fingers closing around hers, but his eyes stayed on Jihoon, cataloging him the unguarded way children study things adults have stopped noticing, the shape of a face, the exact placement of a smile. Then Caleb tilted his head, and asked the question that would end the 6-year silence in one sentence. "Mommy, why does that man have my face?" If you've ever had a secret buried so deep you thought it died with the people who told it, stay with me, because this story is about to prove that some truths don't die. They wait. Before we go further, if stories like this hit you right in the chest, hit subscribe now, because you do not want to miss where this one goes. This is Soul Spoken Tales, and this is a story about a 6-year lie, one little boy who never learned to keep a secret, and the truth that was never supposed to survive this long. Let's go back to where it started. The question hit the corridor like a dropped glass, and for a second nobody moved to sweep it up. Sarah moved first. Caleb. Her voice had gone very calm, very even, the calm of someone holding a door shut with both hands. Hold Mummy's hand. We're going. She gathered the last of the papers in one motion, folder clutched to her chest, and rose without looking at Jihoon again. Caleb's fingers found hers automatically, the way a plant finds light, and she was already turning toward the lifts before Jihoon's mouth caught up with the rest of him. Sarah. He said it again, louder this time, and hated how much it sounded like begging. She didn't stop. The lift doors opened as if they'd been waiting for her, and she stepped inside with Caleb, already reaching for the button. The doors began to close. Jihoon's hand shot out before he'd decided to move it. The sensors caught the motion, reversed, and the doors slid open again. He stepped in. The air in the small box changed instantly, thinner somehow, charged, like the moment before a storm actually breaks rather than just threatens to. Nobody spoke as the doors sealed them in together. Caleb looked up at his mother, then at Jihoon, then back at his mother, his small face working through the puzzle with the seriousness of a much older person doing long division. Jihoon broke first, because he had never in his life been good at silence when silence was actively costing him something. Whose child is that? He heard the words leave his mouth and hated them instantly. Wrong question, wrong tone, wrong everything. 6 years of longing compressed into the ugliest possible sentence. Sarah didn't turn her head. She stared straight ahead at the brushed steel doors, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet in a way that was somehow louder than shouting. You lost the right to ask me that 6 years ago. It landed exactly where she meant it to. Jihoon felt something in his chest fold in on itself. He has the compass, he said, because it was the only thing he had left to offer. He has the mark. Nothing. She didn't so much as blink. Sarah, please, you want answers? She turned, finally, and the look on her face wasn't fresh anger. Fresh anger burned hot and quick and left. This was something that had been banked for 6 years, low and steady, the kind of fire that had learned how to survive on almost nothing. Ask Park. The name went through him like ice water. Director Hyunwoo Park. His grandfather's oldest advisor, the man who'd sat across from Jihoon in a hotel restaurant 6 years ago with a face full of careful sympathy and told him, gently, like he was doing Jihoon a kindness, that Sarah had accepted money from a rival shipping family and left the country to marry into it. That she'd never really wanted the life Jihoon was offering. That the kindest thing, the only thing, was to let her go quietly and protect what remained. Jihoon had believed every word. Park had never lied to him before. Park had practically raised him after his own father died. The lift chimed. Ground floor car park level. The doors opened onto gray concrete and the smell of rain-wet tarmac, and Sarah stepped out without another word. Caleb went with her, but at the last second, before the doors could close between them, the boy turned around. Looked directly at Jihoon. The dimple appeared once more, small and unmistakable, and then he was gone, swallowed by the shadow of a concrete pillar, his mother's hand tied around his. The door slid shut. Jihoon stood alone in the lift, photograph still crushed in one fist, his heart going too fast, his mind doing the same arithmetic over and arriving at the same impossible answer every time. Ask Park. 2 words. He turned them over and over on the ride back up, and by the time the doors opened again onto the rehabilitation wing, something in him had gone very still and very cold, the particular stillness of a man who has just realized that the story he built his entire adult life on top of might have been written by someone with a reason to lie. 6 years of certainty. And it had just stopped feeling certain at all. Sarah barely remembered the drive home. One moment she was standing in the hospital car park with her heart slamming against her ribs, the next she was turning her key in the door of the flat, and Caleb was already kicking off his shoes, dropping his school bag by the radiator, pretending, the way children pretend when they've decided the adults need protecting, that nothing unusual had happened at all. She let him pretend. She made dinner. They ate it. Neither of them mentioned the hospital until Caleb looked up from his plate, fork still in hand, and said, "Mummy." "Yes, love." The man. He looked like me. Her hand stopped over her glass. Lots of people look alike. Caleb shook his head, slow and certain. No. He touched his own cheek, right where the dimple sat. "And these?" He pointed to his eyes. "You knew him." Not a question. A small, 5-year-old statement of fact, delivered with the flat confidence of someone who had never once been wrong about something that mattered to him. Sarah stood up too quickly. Bath time. He let it go. He always knew when to stop pushing, which broke her heart a little more than if he hadn't, and 20 minutes later she was tucking the duvet under his chin, smoothing his hair back from his forehead, when he spoke again into the dark. "Do you think he saw my compass?" Her eyes dropped to his chest, to the brass pendant resting against his pajama top even now, because he refused to take it off, ever, not for baths, not for football, not for anything. The same compass. The same 6-year-old secret. "Go to sleep, baby." She turned off the light and closed the door, and the moment she reached her own room the memories arrived all at once, the way floodwater arrives, not gradually, but as a wall. Director Park, sitting across from her in a hotel lobby 6 years ago, his voice gentle, almost fatherly. Jihoon asked me to speak with you directly, so there'd be no confusion. He's chosen to honor his family's expectations. It would be better, for everyone, if you simply moved on. She had believed him completely, because she was pregnant and terrified and heartbroken enough to believe almost anything a calm, well-dressed man told her with a straight face. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and made herself remember Jihoon's face in the lift instead, not the version from 6 years ago, the version she'd built her grief around, but the one from an hour ago. Shock. Confusion. The way he'd kept saying he has the mark like a man discovering a wound, not concealing one. That wasn't the face of someone protecting a secret. That was the face of someone finding one out. Something small and sharp shifted inside her, dangerous in its quiet way. For the first time in 6 years, she let herself ask the question she'd buried under 5 years of school runs and late shifts and lullabies. What if Park lied? Across the city, in a flat far too large for one person, Jihoon sat in the dark with the photograph on the desk in front of him. The compass. The dimple. The boy's face, again and again, until the features blurred and reformed into something he couldn't stop looking at. Then another memory surfaced, one he hadn't let himself touch in years. Their last night together, Sarah, smiling, then suddenly serious in the particular way she got when something mattered. There's something important I need to tell you. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Not next month. Not someday. Tomorrow. He closed his eyes. If she'd been planning to leave for someone else's money, why ask for tomorrow? If she'd chosen another life, why keep the compass on their son for 5 years? If she'd wanted him gone for good, why tell him, tonight, in an underground car park with her voice shaking with restrained fury, ask Park, instead of simply walking away and saying nothing at all? His eyes opened. For 6 years he had asked himself exactly one question: why did Sarah leave that night? A different question had arrived in its place, and it wouldn't leave. What if she never left at all? What if she was the one who got abandoned? He looked at the clock. 1:45. Tomorrow morning, before the board meeting, before his assistant could fill his calendar with anything else, he was going to walk into Director Park's office. Because one thing had become unbearably clear in the space of a single evening. Somebody had stolen 6 years from both of them. And Jihoon was done paying the price for someone else's lie. Park's office occupied the corner of the 14th floor, all glass and Thames views and the kind of quiet that money buys. Jihoon had no appointment. He gave the secretary no warning. He was through the door before she'd fully risen from her chair. Park looked up from his desk, and for one unguarded fraction of a second, something genuine crossed his face. Surprise. Then it was gone, smoothed over, replaced by the calm, paternal expression Jihoon had trusted his entire adult life. Jihoon. Park set down his pen. You should have called ahead. Jihoon said nothing. He crossed the room, reached into his jacket, and dropped the photograph onto the desk. It slid across polished walnut and stopped directly in front of Park's folded hands. Silence. Park looked down at it. For just a fraction of a second his face changed, a flicker, there and gone, controlled almost before it began. Who is he? You tell me. A child. Park's voice stayed level. I don't understand who is he? Jihoon's voice had gone flat, stripped of the deference he'd given this man for 30 years. Park exhaled slowly, leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers. You already know what happened, Jihoon. Sarah chose another life. Another family. She told me the child wasn't yours to worry about, Park added, gently, the way he'd said everything 6 years ago, like a kindness. Nothing has changed since then. No. Jihoon's voice was quiet now, quieter than Park's, and somehow it filled the room more completely. I only know what you told me. For the first time in the conversation, Park looked uncomfortable. Jihoon reached forward and tapped the photograph, once, on the compass at the boy's throat. Then again, on the dimple at his cheek. The mark. Every firstborn Kang son has carried it for 4 generations. You know that better than anyone. You were at my father's funeral. You've known this family longer than I've been alive. Park said nothing. Did Sarah ever tell you herself? Jihoon said slowly, watching Park's face the way he'd learned to watch a negotiating counterpart across a table, that the child wasn't mine? Park froze. Just for a second. But Jihoon had spent 6 years in boardrooms learning to read the half-second before a lie gets corrected into something smoother, and he caught it, the hesitation, the recalculation, the flicker of something that might have been fear. Park recovered almost immediately. You're reopening wounds that should stay buried, Jihoon. The board meeting starts in 40 minutes. We can discuss family matters after. Wrong answer. Not yes. Not no. A subject change, smooth as silk and just as slippery, and that alone told Jihoon everything the words hadn't. He picked the photograph back up, turned toward the door, and stopped with his hand on the frame. Without looking back, he said, if you're lying to me. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The door closed behind him. Park didn't move for a long time. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then his hand went to his phone, and when he lifted it, it was shaking in a way his hands hadn't shaken in years. He scrolled to a name he hadn't needed in 5 years. Faith. She worked at St. Aldrich's, had, for as long as Sarah had worked there. If anyone could tell him what exactly Jihoon had already seen, and how much damage had already been done, it was her. He pressed call. Faith. A pause, his jaw tightening as her voice came through. I need a favor. I need to know everything you can tell me about Sarah Adisa. And the boy who was with her yesterday. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For 6 years, Director Park had not been protecting a secret. He had been managing one, carefully, from a comfortable distance, confident it would never need defending again. Now, for the first time, he was trying to stop one from exploding in his hands. A few weeks before any of this began, before the lift, before the compass, before any of it, Caleb had wandered into the rehabilitation wing entirely by accident. Sarah had been in session with another patient. A nurse was meant to be watching him. And somehow, in the way small children slip through the gaps adults never quite close, Caleb had ended up in the doorway of a room belonging to an elderly man sitting alone after physiotherapy, staring at the wall with the particular stillness of someone furious at his own body for betraying him. Nobody planned what happened next. A bored 5-year-old had wandered in, climbed uninvited into the visitor's chair, and started talking. And Chairman Jihoon Kang, a man famous throughout the company for his cold precision and his complete lack of patience for small talk, had, against every instinct he possessed, answered. The friendship had grown from there, quietly, the way real things do. By now, most of the rehabilitation staff knew Caleb by name. The nurses waved him through. The physiotherapists saved him a chair. One nurse had started calling him Dr. Caleb after he showed up 3 days running with a small toy ukulele slung over his shoulder, insisting it was a stethoscope and that music was the best medicine, better than the yucky kind. The nickname stuck immediately. Caleb loved it. Chairman Kang was halfway through a resistance band exercise when Caleb appeared in the doorway with his drawing pad tucked under one arm. Hospital Grandpa. The old man's face changed instantly. The flicker was small, but the physiotherapist noticed it, and so did the nurse changing his water jug. You're late, Chairman Kang said, not looking up from the band in his hands. Caleb gasped, deeply offended. You noticed? Of course I noticed. Where were you? I had homework. A pause. It was boring. You would have hated it. Convenient excuse. Caleb grinned, and the whole room seemed to loosen slightly, the way it always did when he arrived. His first order of business, as always, was the medical examination. He marched over, unslung the little ukulele, pressed it flat against the old man's chest with tremendous seriousness, and listened. Moved it to his shoulder. Listened again. Moved it to his forehead, which made absolutely no medical sense whatsoever, and listened one more time. Then he stepped back, folded his arms, and delivered his verdict with the gravity of a Harley Street consultant. Good news. What? You're still alive. The room erupted. Even the chairman, a man who had not laughed freely in longer than most of the staff had been employed there, couldn't fully hide the twitch at the corner of his mouth. It had become routine now. Whenever Caleb appeared, the chairman complained less, pushed harder through his exercises, recovered faster than the consultants predicted. The staff had all noticed, though nobody said it aloud, the way you don't comment on a good thing for fear of scaring it off. That afternoon, once the exercises were done and Caleb had settled cross-legged on the end of the bed with his drawing pad, he tilted his head, suddenly thoughtful in the way that always preceded a question Sarah would have flinched at. Hospital Grandpa. Do you know the tall man? From the lift, at the front doors? Chairman Kang glanced up. What tall man? The one that looks like me. Caleb said it lightly, already flipping to a fresh page, entirely unaware of what he'd just said. He kept staring at me near the doors. I thought maybe you knew him. The old man went very still. He had the same face, Caleb added, almost as an afterthought, and then he smiled, wide, bright, completely innocent, and the dimple appeared on his cheek exactly where it always did. Chairman Kang stared at it. Something about that smile. Something about that dimple, those eyes. He had seen them before. He knew he had. He just couldn't, for the life of him, remember where. As Caleb disappeared down the corridor toward the lifts, drawing pad tucked under his arm, Chairman Kang sat motionless in his chair for a long time. Then a memory surfaced, unbidden, 6 years old and suddenly sharper than it had any right to be. Park, sitting beside his hospital bed after the first stroke scare, speaking softly, carefully, the way a man delivers unfortunate news he's already decided how you should feel about. Asterisk Chairman, she's chosen another path. There's a child involved, not Jihoon's. It's better for everyone if we let her go quietly, before it becomes a scandal the family can't manage. Asterisk Chairman Kang had believed him without a second thought. Why wouldn't he? Park had served the family for 30 years. Park had sat beside his own son's hospital bed once, years before Jihoon was even born. Loyalty like that didn't get questioned. That was, at least, what everyone had always believed. But now the old man stared at the doorway Caleb had just walked through, and something in his chest refused to settle. That dimple. Those eyes. That strange, insistent feeling he couldn't place. If Park was right, he thought, and the thought arrived with the force of something he'd been avoiding for a long time. Why does that child look exactly like my family? That night, Chairman Kang couldn't sleep. He lay in the hospital bed with the lights off, the compass, the dimple, Caleb's careless little questions circling through his mind without mercy, and just after midnight he picked up the phone on the bedside table and made a call he should have made 6 years ago. Every file connected to Sarah Adisa, he told the assistant on the other end, his voice quiet but leaving no room for argument. Everything. By morning, 2 boxes arrived at 7 a.m. He opened the first one himself, before the nurse had even finished the morning OBS, and started reading with the sharp, methodical attention that had built a shipping empire across 2 continents. The first thing he noticed wasn't a lie. It was an absence. There wasn't a single message from Sarah in either box. Not one letter, not one email printout, not one recorded phone call. Every update, every account of what had happened 6 years ago, came from a single source. Director Park. Park said she'd taken money from a rival family. Park said she wanted no further contact with Jihoon. Park said the child belonged to someone else. Everything, filtered through one man, for 6 years, without a single independent word from Sarah herself ever reaching the family directly. Chairman Kang set the file down slowly. For 30 years he had trusted Park with a completeness he had never extended to another human being, not his own board, not his own late wife's family, not even, if he was honest, his own son. That trust had never once been tested. It suddenly felt very dangerous that it hadn't been. He kept reading. Near the bottom of the second box, a hospital record. A prenatal appointment, dated 3 weeks after Park had told him Sarah had already left the country for good. He checked the date again. Then the clinic address. London. She'd still been in London. He found a second appointment further down the file. Same clinic. Weeks later. Still London, weeks after Park had sworn to the family that she was gone. The old man leaned back against the pillow slowly, his heart going harder than his consultant would have liked. Because Director Park did not make careless mistakes. In 30 years, Chairman Kang had never once caught him in an error of any consequence. Which meant this wasn't a mistake at all. He picked up the phone again, and this time his hand wasn't entirely steady. "Come to the hospital," he said, the moment Jihoon answered. "Now. Bring nothing. Just come." Then he set the phone down and looked, for a long moment, at the 2 open boxes on the blanket in front of him, and at something underneath them he hadn't let himself think about in over 40 years. A different name. A different woman. A different well-meaning relative who had once told him, gently, that letting her go was the only sensible thing to do. He had believed that lie once too. He had simply never noticed, until this exact moment, that he might have spent the rest of his life quietly grateful someone had told it to him. Jihoon arrived 28 minutes later, still in yesterday's shirt, having not slept at all. His grandfather was sitting up in bed, 2 open boxes on the blanket in front of him, his face carrying an expression Jihoon had never once seen on it in 32 years. Not anger. Not the cold, contained displeasure that usually meant someone at the company was about to lose their job. Something closer to grief. "Sit down," Chairman Kang said, and Jihoon sat. His grandfather handed him a single sheet of paper without preamble. "Read." Jihoon read it. A prenatal appointment, dated 3 weeks after Park had told the family Sarah had already left the country. He read the date twice, certain he was misreading it. He wasn't. "There's more." His grandfather passed him a second folder before Jihoon could speak. A second appointment. Same clinic. Weeks later. Still London. "She never left," Jihoon said, and his voice didn't sound like his own. "No." Chairman Kang's voice was flat, controlled in the particular way that meant it was taking everything he had to keep it that way. "There's more." The third folder held nothing at all, which was, somehow, worse than anything written down. No letters from Sarah. No emails. No phone records. No message of any kind, in 6 years, that had originated from her directly. Every single account of what had happened between her and Jihoon had passed through one office, one desk, one man. Every piece of information came from Park, Jihoon said slowly, and the shape of it settled into him like a stone dropping through water, sinking, and not stopping. Yes. The room went quiet. Jihoon lowered his head and let the arithmetic finish itself, the way he'd been avoiding letting it finish for 2 days. She was pregnant. His voice cracked on the word, just slightly. She was alone. She thought I'd chosen someone else, because that's what Park told her too, isn't it? His grandfather said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She raised him by herself. Jihoon closed his eyes. 5 birthdays he hadn't been at. 5 first days of school. Countless bedtime stories, scraped knees, small triumphant drawings brought home from nursery, 5 years of an entire small life that had happened somewhere he wasn't, because 2 people who trusted the same man had never once been allowed to compare notes. Across the room, his grandfather looked away, the first time since Jihoon had walked in that the old man had failed to meet his eyes. I should have questioned him. Chairman Kang's voice had gone very quiet. 30 years, and I never once asked him for proof of anything. I simply believed. And because I believed, a child grew up without his father 2 miles from where I was recovering from a stroke. He looked back at Jihoon directly, and there was nothing performed in what came next. I'm sorry. Jihoon froze. His grandfather had never once, in his entire life, apologized to him for anything, not for the missed birthdays during Jihoon's own childhood, not for the years of silence after his father's death, not for anything at all. And here he was, an old man in a hospital bed, carrying the full weight of 6 stolen years without trying to set any of it down onto someone else. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. There was nothing that could give those years back, and both of them knew it. Finally, Chairman Kang asked, "What are you going to do?" Jihoon looked down at the photograph still sitting on top of the folder, Caleb's gap-toothed grin, the compass at his throat. 5 years old. 5 years gone. I'm going to talk to Sarah. His grandfather nodded slowly, and something passed between them that didn't need saying, because they both understood the same thing. Finding the truth had turned out to be the easy part. Convincing Sarah to believe it, after everything it had already cost her to stop believing in him, was going to be very much harder. Sarah set one condition. *1 hour. A public place. I bring Caleb. I stay close. Jihoon agreed before she'd finished typing it. She chose the gardens near the hospital, the same stretch of grass where, 3 days earlier, she'd stood across from him with a folder full of evidence and 6 years of walls between them. Different now, somehow, though nothing about the place had changed. Same benches. Same plane trees dripping the last of the rain. Same traffic noise drifting over the low wall. This time Caleb walked beside her, both hands gripping the straps of his school bag, moving slightly faster than his usual pace. Is he already there? I don't know. What if he's late? Then we wait. Caleb considered this with visible dissatisfaction. I don't like waiting. I know. He was already there, standing near the fountain, hands in his coat pockets, in the same posture Sarah had seen 100 times across boardroom windows and negotiating tables. But his face was different. She'd watched Jihoon walk into rooms full of people who could end his career with one phone call and never once seen him look anything less than entirely composed. He did not look composed now. He looked, unmistakably, afraid. Caleb walked straight up to him without a moment's hesitation. Hi. Jihoon looked down. Hi. A pause. Caleb studied him the way he studied everything, completely, without embarrassment, as though staring were simply the correct and obvious way to learn a thing. Then he unzipped his bag and produced the little ukulele. Hold still. He pressed it against Jihoon's chest with tremendous clinical authority, listened, frowned, listened again. "You're sick," he announced. "I'm sick." "Yes." Caleb looked up at him, entirely serious. "You look sad." From a few feet away, Sarah pressed her lips together and said nothing. Jihoon crouched down slowly to Caleb's level. "You can tell that with a ukulele?" "I'm a doctor," Caleb said, with the total confidence of a 5-year-old who has never once doubted his own credentials. "I can tell almost everything. I'm still learning the hard stuff." Something in Jihoon's face cracked open, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen on him in 6 years. They sat on a bench together while she stood a careful distance away, watching. Caleb took immediate control of the conversation, explaining a cartoon in extraordinary, unbroken detail. 12 full minutes involving characters Jihoon had clearly never heard of and a plot he visibly couldn't follow, then moved on to his teacher, her strict rule about indoor voices, her hair, which he insisted looked exactly like a cloud. "Hospital grandpa says I ask too many questions," Caleb announced. Jihoon went very still. "Hospital grandpa? He's in the place where you get better. He's old and grumpy but he laughs at my drawings. I bring him one every time." Caleb swung his legs off the edge of the bench, matter of fact. "He's my favorite. Besides Mummy." Jihoon said nothing for a long moment, picturing his own grandfather, a man who terrified board directors twice Jihoon's age, sitting in a hospital bed laughing at a 5-year-old's drawings, already calling the boy his favorite without knowing, until 3 days ago, that he had any right to. After the hour was up, Sarah appeared at the edge of the path. Jihoon stood. "You're leaving?" Caleb asked. "I have to." Caleb thought about this, then reached out and caught the sleeve of Jihoon's jacket, not hard, just enough. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Jihoon looked down at the small hand on his sleeve. 5 years of missing a child he hadn't known existed. 5 years of a question that, until 3 days ago, he hadn't known he was allowed to ask. "Yes," he said. "Okay." Caleb let go, entirely satisfied, already turning toward his mother. "Bring snacks." Sarah didn't come to the hospital that week. She sent Caleb once, with Faith, for his usual visit to hospital grandpa, but she stayed away herself, and Jihoon understood well enough not to push. So it was Jihoon who sat beside his grandfather's bed on a gray Thursday afternoon, watching the old man stare at nothing in particular, and asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since the day the 2 boxes arrived. "You said you should have questioned Park. 30 years, and you never once did." He turned the empty water glass on the bedside table, not looking up. "Why not? You question everyone. You question me." His grandfather was quiet for long enough that Jihoon thought he might not answer at all. "Because he told me the story I already expected to hear," Chairman Kang said finally. "That's the most dangerous kind of lie. Not the ones that surprise you. The ones that confirm what you were already prepared to believe." "What were you prepared to believe?" The old man looked toward the window instead of at his grandson. "That love is a liability in a family like ours. That it gets in the way of what actually needs protecting. I believed that a long time before Park ever said a word to me about Sarah." "Why?" For a moment Jihoon thought he'd get nothing further. His grandfather had spent 68 years being a man who didn't explain himself. But then Chairman Kang exhaled, slow and unsteady, and started to speak in a voice Jihoon had never once heard him use. "Before I married your grandmother, there was someone else. A seamstress. Her family had nothing, no name, no standing, nothing my father considered worth anything at all." He paused. "I loved her the way you're not supposed to be able to love anyone at 24. Foolishly. Completely." Jihoon sat very still. "My father didn't forbid it outright. He was cleverer than that. He sent my mother's cousin to speak to her instead, a man she trusted, because he'd known her family for years. Told her I'd already agreed to a marriage that would save the company from a difficult year. Told her the kindest thing she could do was disappear quietly, before I had to choose between her and everything my father had built. He stopped. She believed him. She was gone within the month. I never saw her again. Never learned what became of her. You never told anyone this. There was no one to tell. And no use in it, once it was done. Chairman Kang finally turned to look at his grandson directly, and something in his face had gone rawer than Jihoon had ever seen it. I recognized what Park was doing to you and Sarah, Jihoon. Somewhere, underneath everything, I recognized it immediately, a trusted man, a quiet conversation, a story built to sound merciful instead of cruel. I knew that shape. I'd lived inside it myself. Then why didn't you stop it? Because by the time I let myself truly consider it, 5 years had already gone. And admitting the shape of it meant admitting what I'd let happen to myself was allowed to happen again, under my own roof, to my own grandson. His voice broke, just slightly, on the last words. I didn't want to believe I'd let the same wound open twice in one family and done nothing both times. Jihoon sat with that for a long moment, the machines beside the bed ticking quietly through the silence. You could have told Sarah this, he said eventually. When you met her. It might have made things easier. I intend to, his grandfather said. But it isn't mine to offer as an excuse. It's simply the truth of why I failed both of you as completely as I did. He reached over, slow and deliberate, and closed his hand briefly over Jihoon's wrist, an unfamiliar gesture from a man who had never been physically demonstrative in his life. Don't let it take you 30 years to say her name out loud again the way I let it take me with mine. Neither of them spoke after that. But something had shifted in the room, an old wound finally given air, a pattern finally named instead of merely repeated, and for the first time since the lift doors had closed between them 3 days ago, Jihoon understood exactly what he needed to say to Sarah, and why waiting any longer to say it would only cost them more of what they'd already lost. Faith had liked Sarah from the first week they'd worked together, but it was Caleb who'd made her love the both of them, the way most people at St. Aldrich's eventually did. Which was exactly why Director Park's questions, when they started, felt wrong before she could even say what was wrong about them. He'd called her office 2 days after Jihoon's visit, his voice as smooth and unhurried as ever. Just a small thing, he'd said. For the chairman's file. What days does Sarah usually bring the boy in? I don't really keep track. Does he spend much time in the rehabilitation wing? With the patients? Faith frowned at the receiver. Why does that matter for a file? Just being thorough. A pause, the smile audible even down the phone line. Which entrance do they usually use? The questions kept coming after that, small, specific, oddly interested in a 5-year-old schedule in a way that had nothing to do with any file Faith had ever heard of. By the time she hung up, she knew one thing clearly, Park wasn't being thorough. He was worried. That night she couldn't stop turning it over. Then she remembered something Sarah had let slip once, years ago, in the exhausted honesty of a night shift, that when everything had ended with Jihoon, it hadn't been Jihoon who'd delivered the news. It had been Park. The man who closed the door. The man who'd never, not once in 5 years, checked in to see how either of them were doing afterward. A chill went through her. The next morning, she caught Sarah before rounds. Can I tell you something? Sarah nodded. Faith lowered her voice. Be careful around Director Park. He's been asking questions about Caleb, when you arrive, when you leave, which parts of the hospital he goes to. It didn't feel like nothing. The color left Sarah's face. Not because she didn't know who Park was, she knew exactly who he was. 6 years ago he'd been the man who told her Jihoon didn't want them. Now he was asking after her son's schedule. Why would he need to know that? Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to Faith. Faith didn't have an answer. But she had something else, a half-remembered afternoon from weeks earlier, filing insurance paperwork for a shipping claim that had crossed her desk purely by administrative accident, a claim connected to Kang Maritime. She hadn't thought about it since. She thought about it now. There was a claim, she said slowly. Cargo insurance, routed through Park's office directly, months back. The payout figure didn't match the loss report. I flagged it as an admin error and moved on, it wasn't my department. She frowned, piecing it together as she spoke. Sarah, 6 years ago, wasn't there something you mentioned once? About an audit, right before everything happened with Jihoon? Sarah went very still. There was a discrepancy. In the charity gala accounts, the ones Kang Maritime sponsored that year. I noticed it during setup and told Jihoon I needed to speak to him about something important, before I'd even worked out what it was. Her breath caught. I told him the night before Park came to see me. The two women looked at each other, and the shape of 6 years finally, fully, resolved itself. Park hadn't lied to protect the family's name. He'd lied to protect himself. I need to tell Jihoon, Sarah said. I already sent his grandfather what I found on the claim, Faith said. This afternoon. No message. He didn't need one. Across the city, in the corner office with the Thames view, Director Park set down his phone after a call that had gone unanswered for the third time that day. Faith had stopped returning his calls. Chairman Kang's assistant had requested a full file review of every insurance claim processed through his office in the last 2 years. Jihoon had gone quiet, not the quiet of a man giving up, but the quiet of a man building a case. The walls were closing in, and Park knew it. He sat for a long time staring at the calendar on his desk, at the date circled 3 weeks out, the Kang Maritime Charity Concert, the one event of the year guaranteed to put every board member, every major client, and half of London's shipping press in one room at the same time. If he was going to survive this, he needed one last move. Something big enough, and public enough, to make the ground underneath him solid again before anyone could pull it away entirely. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months, the office of a rival shipping family, one with an unmarried daughter and a business relationship worth protecting. It was, he told himself, simply being thorough. The concert hall sat right on the water, all glass and steel-lit gold against the dark Thames, and by 7 o'clock it was full, board members, clients, press, half of London's shipping industry in black tie, all of them there for Kang Maritime's annual charity gala. Nobody in the room knew it was about to become something else entirely. Sarah stood in the wings in a dress the color of deep water, running through the set list in her head one final time, when Faith found her backstage, breathless. Chairman Kang is here. Front row. He asked to see the running order. Why? He didn't say. He just said, tell her to trust it. Sarah didn't have time to ask more. The stage manager was already signaling her. She'd written the closing song 5 years ago, in the flat, in the middle of the night, in the exhausted stretch between Caleb's feedings, back when she still didn't know whether she was writing it for herself or for a version of Jihoon who might never hear it. She'd never performed it publicly. Tonight, without fully deciding to, she'd swapped it into the set an hour before doors. Out front, Director Park stood near the stage with a glass of champagne he wasn't drinking, watching the room fill with the particular satisfaction of a man about to fix everything at once. He found the MC before the second act. A brief word, a folded card, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A small announcement, he said. Before the final performance. Just a formality. Jihoon was near the bar when he saw it happening, Park crossing toward the stage, the rival shipping family's daughter appearing at his side in a dress clearly chosen for exactly this moment, and something cold dropped through his chest. The MC took the microphone. Before we close tonight's program, Director Park has asked for a moment to share some wonderful news on behalf of the Kang family. He hasn't, Jihoon said, already moving. Too late. Park was at the microphone, one hand resting with practiced warmth on the young woman's shoulder. It is my great pleasure, he began, to announce the engagement of Jihoon Kang to, that's not true. Jihoon's voice cut across the room from the floor, sharp enough that every head turned. I have never proposed to anyone. Director Park has no authority to speak for this family. A ripple went through the crowd, the specific, delighted horror of several hundred wealthy people realizing they were about to witness something real. Park's composure held for exactly 1 second longer than it should have. Jihoon, this isn't the place, you're right. Jihoon walked toward the stage, and the crowd parted without being asked to. It's exactly the place. Everyone here sponsors this company. Everyone here trusted you with this family's name for 30 years. I think they deserve to know what that trust actually paid for. From the front row, Chairman Kang rose slowly from his chair, one hand steadying against his cane, and the room went fully silent for the old man in a way it hadn't for anyone else all night. Faith, Jihoon said, not taking his eyes off Park, the file. Faith stepped forward from the wings with a tablet already open, the insurance claim, the mismatched payout figures, the override signature that traced 6 years of intercepted messages back to a single desk. She didn't need to say anything. She simply held it up, and the nearest screen at the side of the stage, wired for the evening's charity presentation, picked up the feed and threw it 12 feet high for the entire room to read. Park's face went the color of the tablecloths. You told my grandson Sarah had taken money to leave him, Jihoon said, and his voice, for the first time all evening, shook slightly, not with uncertainty, but with 6 years finally finding somewhere to go. You told Sarah that I'd paid to have her removed. Both lies. Built by the same man. Because a discrepancy she found in a charity audit 5 years ago was about to expose exactly what's on that screen right now. Somewhere near the stage door, Sarah had stopped, unseen, one hand pressed to her chest, watching the truth she'd waited 6 years to hear said out loud finally getting said, not quietly, not privately, but in front of everyone Park had spent 30 years trying to impress. Park opened his mouth. Nothing honest came out of it. Security was already moving through the crowd toward him. Somewhere near the back, a phone camera came up, then another. The rival family's daughter had already stepped away from his side, her face carefully blank, already calculating the distance she needed from this particular scandal. And in the middle of all of it, unnoticed for one crucial moment, a small figure in a miniature bow tie slipped past a security guard's leg and started making his way toward the stage, toward his mother, toward his father, and toward the brass compass pendant he'd taken off, for the first time in 5 years, and was carrying now in one careful, closed fist. ## Chapter 12, The Compass. Nobody stopped him. That was the thing about a room in chaos. Security had eyes on Park, the press had eyes on their phones, and a small boy in a bow tie moving quietly along the edge of the stage simply wasn't what anyone was watching for. Sarah saw him first. Caleb, she started forward, but he was already climbing the 2 low steps at the side of the stage with the single-minded focus he brought to everything that mattered to him. He walked straight past the security guard now escorting Director Park toward the exit, straight past his great-grandfather standing at the front row with his cane and his unreadable, watching face, straight up to Jihoon, who was still standing at the microphone with the whole room staring at him and no idea, until this exact second, what to do with any of it. Caleb opened his fist. The compass pendant sat in his palm, chain pulled beneath it, catching the stage lights. You said it so you always know your way back, Caleb said, loud enough that the microphone picked it up and carried it to the very back of the hall. Mummy told me. So I think you should have it now. Because I think you're not lost anymore. The room, which had been buzzing with scandal and camera flashes 30 seconds earlier, went completely silent. Jihoon crouched down slowly, the way he had in the gardens weeks before, and let Caleb place the pendant in his open hand. Up close, he could see the boy had been carrying it carefully, protectively, the whole way across the stage, like something he understood mattered, even if he couldn't have explained exactly why. Thank you, Jihoon said, and his voice didn't come out steady at all. Caleb nodded, satisfied, business concluded. Then, with the same seriousness he brought to every diagnosis, he reached up and pressed 2 fingers lightly against Jihoon's chest. Better, he announced. You don't look sad anymore. A laugh broke through the crowd, startled, relieved, the specific laugh of several hundred people who badly needed permission to feel something other than shock. Someone near the back began, tentatively, to clap. It spread. Sarah had reached the edge of the stage by then, and Jihoon looked past his son to find her there, watching both of them with an expression she hadn't let herself wear in public in 6 years. He didn't try to say anything grand. There was no version of a speech that fit a stage full of scandal and champagne and a 5-year-old holding his father's hand for the first time in front of 300 strangers. He simply held out his other hand, not pulling, just offering, the same way he had in the lift weeks ago and had no right to expect an answer to. Sarah looked at his hand for a long moment. Then at Caleb, glowing under the stage lights, entirely unaware he'd just rearranged the shape of all their lives. Then back at Jihoon. She stepped up onto the stage, but she didn't take his hand, not yet. She stood beside him instead, close enough that Caleb, delighted, immediately wedged himself between them and grabbed one hand from each, the way a compass needle settles once it's finally found north. From the front row, Chairman Kang lowered himself back into his seat, one hand pressed briefly to his own chest, watching his great-grandson standing exactly where Caleb had always drawn himself, in the middle, between two people, exactly where he belonged. A lie built this family's grief for 6 years. It took one small hand holding out a compass to start undoing it. Nobody on that stage got a perfect ending tonight. What they got was something better, a second chance, earned the hard way, in front of everyone who once believed the lie. The applause hadn't stopped. Somewhere in the crowd, phones were already uploading the footage that would be everywhere online by morning. If this story moved you the way it moved me writing it, do 3 things right now. Like this video so more people find it, subscribe so you never miss the next one, and comment below, should Sarah give Jihoon a real second chance, not just for Caleb's sake, but for her own? I read every single comment, and I want to know what you'd do in her position. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.